Naoko and Naoko and Fikrat will talk to us about the instructions for the day and how to access the data and to move forward with that. And then David will talk about team formation, how are we going to form teams, and how we'll be working on November 6th. We'll be using the Remo platform, which is a really cool platform that allows us to set up tables and interact and to move around during that November 6th timeframe. Then we'll have an open question and answer and kind of wrap things up. I would encourage you in terms of a hashtag for all of this and our event, between now and Saturday and on Saturday, you can use the hashtag Datathon YYC, and we'll be using that. All right, I will stop my sharing, and I will invite Tony from RBC to take center stage. Tony, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for having me. I haven't been in Calgary for very long, just a month, but I'm really happy to be here. I want to thank Data for Good, Calgary Homeless Foundation, for choosing RBC as a partner for this year's Datathon. RBC is very proud and honored to be sponsoring this fantastic event. The reason being is we're really committed to supporting the communities in which we operate, and we have a very significant presence in Alberta. We have over 4,000 employees in Alberta that help out individuals in wealth management, capital markets, and personal banking, and commercial and small business. And in Calgary alone, we have about 1,500 employees. And now, it's not all. We're starting now to invest more in Calgary, and we've started to build out our new Calgary Innovation Hub. And that hub really demonstrates our faith in Calgary's growing tech community, our commitment to developing and expanding that tech community and providing valuable opportunities for professional development. We're creating 300 jobs and new technology roles to start off our Calgary hub. And it's really aimed at growing Calgary's technology ecosystem in areas such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, in data engineering and analytics, full stack software delivery, site reliability engineering, and really improving the client experience. If you want to learn more, throughout the Datathon, you can talk to anyone from RBC. They'd be happy to kind of talk a little bit more about what's going to happen at the Innovation Hub. Calgary is really going to be kind of one of those key components in our global technology and operations team. That team's going to really help drive our enterprise strategy around creating kind of an innovative ecosystem to empower our clients, to empower businesses, and to support the community itself. And a key component of that ecosystem is something that kind of like at the moment we have humorously called the brain, because we don't really have a better name for it at the moment. But the brain is one of those, it's a data-driven platform that we're building that's going to enable RBC to execute artificial intelligence and machine learning at scale in real time and using natural interfaces. And it needs to do that in a trustworthy manner that ensures the privacy of all of our clients, because it's people's data, right? It's not necessarily ours. So it's something that's very interesting. And like I said, at the heart of all of this is data, which kind of really brings me back to this Datathon. It's all about data, and we have a vast amount of data. Some of it is confidential, right? And some of it is public, but we're using that data for something good. And I'm really excited about this particular Datathon because we want to see the innovative ideas that everyone's going to bring forward next week. And I want to mention that, since it's virtual, a little bit harder in certain ways. So RBC is going to be providing lunch to all the participants via DoorDash on the day of the Datathon. So that way you can kind of keep yourselves well fueled while you're pumping out code and coming up with great ideas. So please, go ahead, let those creative juices flow, and hopefully the food will help you with that. I just want to conclude now by once again thanking the organizers, Data for Good, the Calgary Homeless Foundation, and those at RBC for making the whole event possible. We're going to be making a donation as part of RBC to the Calgary Homeless Foundation as part of our involvement and in furtherance of our commitment to the communities that we have a presence in. And on that note, I really want to thank everyone for allowing us to be here and to participate. And I really look forward to the rest of the event. And I'll hand it back now. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thanks so much, Tony. And that's really exciting news about the Calgary Innovation Center. It's 300 jobs, in the data analytics technology area is just super stuff. And in advance, thanks so much for lunch. It's going to be kind of a virtual thing. We'll be explaining how that's going to work a little bit later. And we will have RBC folks with us as well on Saturday, November 6th. I'll be there to answer some questions that you might have about RBC, and maybe have some data experts there as well that can act as mentors as we go along. So with that, I'll invite Oliver to share your screen and to kind of do the overview of the Calgary Homeless Foundation.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And before I do that, I just want to say good evening to everyone, and thanks for joining this Datathon, and thanks to Data for Good for organizing all this. I'm quite impressed that, if I see this right, there's like 78 people in attendance, which is amazing. Okay, but not wasting too much time, I'm going to try and share my screen now. Is it visible?
Yeah, so sorry, you may just want to mention kind of your role at the Homeless Foundation, and kind of your team as well.
Yeah, I probably should have done that. Okay, so let me, well, I think you can probably see me still as well. So my name is Oliver Schmidt. I am the Director of Data and Analytics at the Calgary Homeless Foundation. The foundation, I'll go a little bit into detail who we are and what we do. But basically, I've been with the Calgary Homeless Foundation for a bit over 2 years, which is around the same time that we started talking with Jeff and Data for Good actually about this Datathon. But obviously, due to COVID, there were delays and other elements. Under me, there are two kind of teams that we have, and the presentation will explain a little bit how that all is structured. But basically, all the data warehousing, business intelligence, analytics, that's kind of one team that I have, and then the other team is the application that we use to kind of collect data and track that. Okay, so let's get started. Click here. So there's a bit of an agenda that I want to go through. So what we'll talk about is first explaining what homelessness actually is, because most likely, at least that was for me before I joined the foundation, there are assumptions what homelessness is, which is not always necessarily the actual reality. I want to talk a little bit about who CHF is, so the Calgary Homeless Foundation, what the homeless serving system of care is, how we collect data, what data sets we will use in this datathon, and then some rules around the use of data. So there's, I'll go into more detail later, but there's a range of acts that apply that control this data or that govern this data that we need to abide by. Okay, so what is homelessness? There's an official definition by the Canadian Observatory, which describes it as a range of housing and shelter circumstances. So it's not just one state. So it's people without any shelter on one end. So those are the people that probably most individuals would identify as homelessness when you see someone sleeping on the street. But there's also individuals on the other end of the spectrum that are insecurely housed. And I'm going to go a little bit more detail. So this is kind of the range of homelessness. You have on the left side the completely unsheltered one. So people sleeping in a park, on the bench, in vacant buildings or entrances, those kind of things. What most people, I think, would associate as homelessness. But that's just one part. The other part is emergency shelter. So there's a number of shelters in the city, and what they provide, you can basically go there go to a shelter if you don't have anywhere to sleep. If they have space, they will let you in. You can sleep overnight, and then in the morning you get kind of leave again, and then you can use them as an overnight accommodation, if you will, which, as you can imagine, here in Calgary with our winters, is quite critical. Now, if we go further to the right, then we have the provisionally accommodated, and that's people, for example, if you're in a hospital but you have no home, you are not homeless at that point. You have somewhere to sleep because you're in a hospital, but you eventually will be discharged from the hospital and you have nowhere to go to. Same would apply to if you are incarcerated. The one thing that is probably the least known, very difficult to find out the volume, is something called couch surfing. And couch surfing, those are the individuals that stay at a friend's place. I, for example, when I was a student, I remember it was in London, in the UK. I was showing two friends. Another friend from another city came, and he actually slept on our couch for 6 months. We would consider that homeless, because there is not necessarily a home to go to if they couldn't stay in that place anymore. So we call that couch surfing. And then at the right end, we have the individuals that are at risk of homelessness. So they're not homeless yet. They might be in their condo and living there, but they have an eviction notice. They might have to leave the condo in 4 weeks' time or something like this, and have nowhere to go to. So they are, while they are not homeless as such, they are at risk of homelessness, and then still something we work with. Go to the next. Now, the causes for homelessness are quite complex. There is, and everyone will have a different perception of that. I remember when I was young, you kind of think, well, maybe most of them are drug addicted or something, and that's why they're homeless. They made bad decisions, and that's really a very kind of simplistic view of it, because there's a large range. We kind of categorize them into 3 categories. So there's the structural ones, things like discrimination, poverty, lack of affordable housing, which we have here in Calgary. Those are all aspects that can contribute or move you towards the homelessness system. We have system failures. So as I mentioned earlier, hospitals will accommodate you until you are healed, if you will, or you had your operation, and then they will basically kick you out because they have to free up space for other people to come in. They're not going to take care of you if you don't have anywhere to go to. So you will basically, the system, same with the correctional facilities, they're not designed to help these individuals. Or if you're new to Canada, like immigrants and things like that. And then on the blue side, we have the relational element. So some people have substance abuse issues. You might have had a personal crisis, or you might suffer from domestic violence and have to escape, which is not uncommon, unfortunately, or traumatic events that can simply cause you to lose your housing or lose your job, which as a result might lose your housing. Okay, so the homelessness ecosystem, this is kind of like how we interface with other public systems. So on the outside, you have the five yellow rings are the public systems. You have housing, income support, justice, health, children's services. We are actually designed to be a catch-all system. So intentionally, while between the public systems, you can fall between the cracks, and I'll go in a little bit more detail in that in another slide. As I just mentioned, the health system will kick you out of a hospital if you are finished, or if you're done with your stay, even if you don't have anywhere to go to. So we are intentionally designed to kind of catch everything. We kind of categorize our services, if you will, or the individuals that we serve into the kind of population. So we have singles that are basically individuals that have no family or no dependents. We have families where it could be a single parent or multi-parent family with one or multiple children. And then we also have youth as a sector. So anyone who is not 18. Within this, we then also have like pressure points, ethnicity, sexual orientation, human rights. For example, there's no official right to a house or a home. It's not enshrined that you have the right to a home, if you will. Yeah, and I think that's probably also within this. We have then the homeless serving system of care. So Calgary Homeless Serving System of Care. That's what we kind of steward and lead. And I'll go into a bit more detail in a little bit later. So who's CHF? We are basically what's considered a system level leader of the Calgary Homeless Serving System of Care. Our purpose is guiding the fight against homelessness. And we're primarily grant funded. So by GOA, so the government of Alberta is the primary funder. I would think we're probably about 90–95% grant funded. Of that 90%, the bulk is the government of Alberta, but there's also funding from the government of Canada. And there are some donations that we receive, but they're not our primary funding source. And we are probably around, I think annually, receive about 40 to 50 million in funding that we then distribute. So what we do is we provide leadership to the system. The system of care, and there will be a slide later, is actually quite complex, or built out of a large amount of independent organizations. So we work with the system of care to realize something that we call Together to Zero. What this means, we're trying to achieve a functional zero state. That kind of means we know that realistically, homelessness will never be completely eliminated. We're probably not going to get to all, maybe we will in some decades in the future. But what we want to achieve is a state where if someone loses their home, so they might lose their job, therefore lose their home, that we have enough supports ready that these individuals can be taken care of. The homelessness, the episode of homelessness, they have the right supports, and the episode of homelessness will be brief until they're back, can leave the homelessness system and are independently living again. If we achieve that state, that's what we call functional zero. We are not a provider of services, we are funder of programs. So as I mentioned, we are grant funded, the government of Alberta, primarily the government of Canada, give us money, and then we distribute the money to other organizations who then provide the actual services. So we are basically a funder of programs, and we also operate in coordinating the system. So all the different organizations that are involved in providing services, and I'll show you some in a little bit later. We try to work with them to coordinate it, so it's not so difficult for the individual who's experienced homelessness. They already have enough problems. They don't want to navigate 50, 60, 70 different organizations that all have their entry and exit criteria. We also provide the HMIS, that the Homelessness Management Information System. It's the key data system that we use to track, and that's actually where all the data that you will get access to as part of this Datathon is entered into. As a system level leader, what we're trying to do is we want to evolve efficiencies and effectiveness. And we want to use the data for this. So this will be an exciting activity in the Datathon to see what some of the findings that we can find and how we can then apply them. We also foster a community of networks and collaborating partnerships. And then we advocate local integration of the public systems. So AHS as the health system, for example, we work with them as well to just kind of create connections so that when someone is in a hospital but has no home, that when they come to the end of their stay, that we get informed and we can support the individual as they come out, as compared to the AHS just sending them into the wild, if you will. Okay, our strategic circle of impact. So some of the aspects that we do. So we have research and data is actually a big focus. As I mentioned, I've been here for 2 years. It was actually, my role was created at the time, and my whole team was in a way created to really drive that agenda, use the data to actually benefit. We do a lot of community mobilization. So that's as I said, the coordination of the system, We also have events and donations and things like that. And then we also affect the public and political will. So out of our research will come findings that we can then use either with government or even with the public to kind of say, if you invest $1 into the homelessness system, the benefit to other systems, savings on other systems might be $4. So that kind of, we use data and findings to inform governments and politicians, but also drive public political momentum through the public to ensure that the funding continues. And then, as I said, we are the funder of outcomes and the impact. So, what is the Homeless Serving System of Care? HSSC. Sometimes you will see it on the slide as CHSSC, which is basically just Calgary Homeless Serving System of Care, because our foundation the focus is Calgary. While we are coordinating and collaborating on some initiatives with other cities in Alberta, our funding is purely Calgary focused. So Edmonton, for example, will get different funding from the government. Same thing as other cities. As I mentioned, we are really designed to be a catch-all. So we will support everyone and anyone. There's no aspect where we say, no, you don't quite qualify for these criteria. You're not sick enough to get to hospital, or you're not poor enough to get income support, something like that. We are basically designed to make sure everyone gets some support. And then there's a range of different support. So what you see here is the integration of the system of care, which we're guiding as well. So on the left side, you have, let's say, the individual. I'll go into the services in a bit more detail later, because we are talking about a client journey, but it shows you, so if you enter the system, there's a range of different types of support, and they're designed depending on the individual's needs. So we have, for example, supportive housing. It's called permanent there. Some of these slides are a little bit outdated in language, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's permanent, but it's basically supportive housing where we provide either a condo, or it could be a rented unit, it could be in a building with more supports. There's other elements like emergency shelters, which I already mentioned, so where you can go just to stay overnight and then you leave in the morning again. We have programs that look at outreach. Outreach is something where we work with people that are sleeping on the streets and sleeping rough or in tents. And there's a range of services that we're trying to coordinate to ensure that every angle is covered, and it's not just like one kind of service that's provided. Because as you can imagine, every individual is different. Every individual has different needs. A family has different needs than a single individual. Someone with a lot of health conditions and maybe mental health conditions as well has very different needs than someone who purely lost his job and can't afford rent anymore. So we're kind of covering all those areas and trying to coordinate the system as well. Okay, this slide is really kind of trying to explain the functional zero concept that I mentioned. So what you have there at the top are the primary systems, like housing, income support, justice, child services, health. If you kind of fall or enter homelessness and fall into the systems, that's where we kind of catch you, and we try at every point to reconnect you to the primary systems again. So what this means, for example, we have programs that we call diversion. Someone who shows up at a shelter might be a low need individual, might just have lost their job, but they don't have a lot of health issues where they need additional support. We're going to try and kind of connect you either to your family. So, we might have been estranged, or give you some money as a damage deposit if that's your struggle to get another rental unit. Then obviously we have a lot of programs, as I mentioned, that kind of can support individuals in their journey through the homelessness, and we're always trying to get them independent again. If it isn't successful at the beginning, then hopefully after the programs and the supports that we have, eventually get people back into independence and out of the system, if you will. If we achieve that, and as I said, it's a short event or short episode of homelessness, and we have enough supports to manage everyone. So we have no wait list, which unfortunately we have at the moment. But everyone who would lose their home gets supports as quickly as possible, the right support, and then back into independence. That's what we would call functional zero. Okay, now this is a slide where I wanted to give a little bit of an idea of what the numbers look like. Unfortunately, this slide is based on an infographic. As you can see, it's from 1920. With COVID, this has changed significantly. So while normally we would have about 50 programs that we would fund, by now it's actually doubled. The government has kindly invested a lot during COVID into the system because they understood the potential impact this would have. So we're more on about 100 programs funded. We also have non-funded programs that would bring the number to about 200. And we're working with about 30 to 35 agencies. But it gives you a sense of the numbers, you know, like in that year, we placed 735 people into a housing program. And then, you know, majority obviously singles, but we also have a significant amount of families and youth. The ethnicity is indigenous, unfortunately, are very overrepresented in the data, and you will find that as we go along. And then at any point in time, this number is probably about right, we have about a bit over 2,000 families or individuals in housing support in our funded programs. And then again, majority is singles, but also a significant amount of families and youth. Okay, here, this is really, and you don't have to read all of this, I really just wanted to show you, this is the amount of independent organizations that operate in the homeless serving system of care. So there are, it gives anything from AHS to food banks and, you know, all kinds of things. There's a bunch of shelters. There's a large amount of organizations that operate in the space and that provide services. So some of them we fund, some of them we don't fund. Some of them we have data for, some not, but it's a complex system, as you can see. Okay, so what data do we collect? The way we collect data is basically through the use of what we call the HMIS. That's our database, the Homeless Management Information System. It's a tool, it's a licensed tool. It's actually by an American vendor, designed as a data capture system. So we have the agencies that we are funding. Part of their funding requirement is that they enter the data into that system. We also, as I mentioned, have non-funded programs. This could be because we used to fund it, but we don't fund it any longer, but the program still runs. They still enter data, but we also provide agencies who want to use the system access to it so they can enter the system for free. Helps them in their process and helping with the individuals, and helps us in understanding the data better and how the system operates. If you can imagine, if we have 200 programs, only 100 of those are funded. So about half of the programs are actually not funded. If we wouldn't have that data, that would be an immense blind spot. So we would never really fully understand the journey of individuals. So we have about 900 plus users across about 32 agencies. And as I said, 200 plus by now, that's probably higher again because of COVID, different programs that we fund. They enter the data. We then move it into our data warehouse overnight, which also gets data from shelters. So the reason shelters are separate, they're actually directly funded by government. So there's a separation there. They're not funded by us, but they submit data to us. Again, most of the shelters anyway in the city submit data to us that we then load in our warehouse as well. And then we have something called niche programs. That, for example, we have one program where we have referrals. They provide maybe furniture or other kind of little things. They might not use the full HMIS system, which is designed for housing and support and case management. They might send us data directly as well. Everything is centralized in our warehouse, and then we generate data marts and do a lot of calculations on it. Okay, so this is a little bit of a view of a potential journey. Or the different types of programs. As you can see, there's a large number of different types of programs. On the left side, when an individual enters, we have prevention, and prevention is aimed at individuals that are not homeless but at risk of homelessness. So someone with an eviction notice. We're trying to kind of find the right supports, work with them to prevent them from ever losing the house, either by finding another home or maybe getting some financial support to find another home. As I said, it might just be a damage deposit or anything else, basically to avoid them ever getting into homelessness. Underneath, we have diversion. The TBD is old now, that we kind of started funding that in January 2020. Diversion is a program, or are programs that are designed for people who are newly homeless, if you will. So they are showing up at a shelter, but we're trying to kind of get them out of that as quickly as possible. Again, through a variety of means, anything from connecting them to family and friends, or helping them with interview skills for a job, or any kind of thing. It could also be financial support as well. So they have a short episode of homelessness, might be in a shelter, but we want to kind of get them back into independence as quickly as we can. Then you have programs like outreach. As I said, those are programs where we work with people that are sleeping on the streets or in tents and encampments. There's emergency shelters. And then there's something called transitional housing, which is kind of like a short-term housing where, let's say, someone flees domestic violence. They might go into traditional housing up to 2, 3, 4, maybe 6 months, and we're trying to again help them to find their own housing, but we don't want them to be homeless. So short-term housing. After that, there's the CAA, is we call it coordinated access and assessment. In reality, and in the data we'll find, it's basically our wait list. It's the list of individuals that are waiting for housing places and spaces. There's a lot of work done with the individual to find out exactly their needs, and then based on that analysis, they go into the relevant, correct supported housing programs. There's a range of different ones. I won't go into all the details here because it's a bit too much. But you can imagine there are people with lots of health conditions that need a lot more support. And there are people with we call like light touch, where literally if we just give them a rented unit, they can actually manage themselves and work on, don't need as much, like don't need mental health supports or substance abuse supports or anything like that. Then there's also support services. The goal then obviously is to eventually, after they get the support, to exit the system, and we have programs like rent subsidy programs or connect them with on-market housing. The numbers that you see here, they are basically the assessments that we do, and that's how we collect data. It's interview-based, they're questionnaires. I'll go in a bit more detail. So this, for example, is how we actually capture data. Paper questionnaires that the programs that we're funding, they will have case managers, they will sit down with the individuals or on the phone, different ways. And depending on which program and where they are on their journey, all these numbers are different types of assessments. So there's different information captured at different points in the journey. On these, what we basically have, like the assessments are different based on program types, by sector as well. So family will have some questions that are different to single individuals. And we currently have 27 different ones. And when I say different, a lot of the questions are the same. So often, generally the questions will be, what's the name, age, gender, all those, date of birth, gender, all those kind of things. But then there's also program specific questions, and they will vary. So that's why it's 27. We also capture data on process. So as this data gets entered, there, for example, referrals between programs. That's not an assessment. Those are not questions to the individual that experiences homelessness. Those are process-generated data elements, like how many referrals are open, how many were rejected, program entry exit, like what date was the entry and the exit. And then we have also data derivation. So the obvious, the most common used example I always use is, okay, so we have a date of birth and we have an entry date, and we will calculate the age of the individual at the point of entry. But there's a range of other derivations that you will find in the data and that we calculate in our warehouse to kind of monitor this. And then we have external sources for data. So as I mentioned, shelters submit us data directly. It's quite limited. It's basically just date of the stay, some identifiers, and that's about it. But it allows us to at least have visibility of that and niche programs. So external data sources come in as well. This one is just to give you a sense of, again, of the information and the different assessments. So We have client demographics. UDEs is kind of universal data elements, is what we call it. That's kind of captured pretty much all the time. At the point of the CAA, so the wait list, the coordinated access and assessment, there's a different assessments being done, or questionnaires, and as you can see, they're different between singles or families, or if it's youth. On the shelter side, we have intake assessments. On the housing side, we have a range of assessments that we do in those programs, and then the same as rent subsidy, housing assessment. So each program type has different assessments. Some have more, some have less, which is kind of well, not intentional, but kind of makes sense when you understand how the systems work. So prevention is a kind of ideally a one-off event. We do kind of a follow-up assessment, but when you're in housing, we actually assess the individual when they come in, but then also every 3 months as they are in support, we kind of get in contact with them and capture certain data, and then when they exit. There's way more assessments on that side. Okay, so what kind of information do these assessments capture? So kind of alluded to, we capture demographics, we capture information on family, like size of family, how many dependents, data elements on the homelessness history, because unfortunately, some people get institutionalized. So when they go into a program, they kind of have unfortunately, a long-standing history. The housing needs, the kind of support needs that they have. We capture information on their income, employment and training, wellness, health needs, justice and legal information, exit information, and client satisfaction. Those are kind of the main pieces that we will have for the data. Okay, so what data sets will we use? Now, because this is a virtual datathon, we actually had to limit the data that we can make accessible through this, and partly because of the laws that abide, but primarily because it's virtual and there's less control we can have. So we're going to use 2 data sets. The first data set is on the housing supports impact. So individuals or families basically enter a housing program. So we have information on the program, entry of the program. Then around every 3 months, we have follow-up assessments, and they can go as long as the individual is in the program, and some will have many years in the program. Others will only be maybe 2 years in the program. There's all kinds of different ranges. So we continuously, every 3 months, have follow-up assessments with them, and then eventually an assessment at the program exit, and they're different. Now, the housing support or supports impact data set will basically be assessment-based. So you will have, for every assessment, there's a record in the system. So you have an entry record, and you will have, for the same individual in the same program, a range of follow-up records, and then eventually an exit record. So we have the intake assessment. There are kind of key questions about the individual and their engagement with the health and justice system in the last 12 months. So when they come in the last 12 months, you can see here the question: have you had any involvement with the health system in the past 12 months while you were homeless? And then you will have data elements about yes, no, don't know, decline to answer. But then also we have additional questions and data points in regards to, well, how many days were you hospitalized, or how many times have you been hospitalized, or how many times have you used the emergency services? So all the kind of elements you can see here. And then the same in regards to the legal engagement with the legal system. You know, how many days were you in jail, and how many times were you in jail in the last 12 months? The key point to note on intake, it asked for a 12-month period. We don't know if this, let's say you were incarcerated or you were in hospital for 2 days or 25 days. We don't know if that's 5 times for 5 days over the last 12 months, or if that's one event of 25 days. That's unfortunately that resolution we don't have. We simply just know in that time frame, that amount of time in hospital. Then as they are in the program and get the support, as I said, every 3 months we follow up with them. Now, it's not on the dot, on the date every 3 months, because this, case managers, sometimes it might be a little bit longer than 3 months, sometimes a little bit less, but it's the goal is to check in with them every 3 months. And at that point, we only ask the same questions over the past 3 months. So how many times hospitalized in 3 months as compared to 12 months. So it's an important distinction to make. Again, we don't know if there's 20 days of hospitalization, if that's 20 independent events, or if it's one event, we don't know that. Okay, the other thing I wanted to note here is this HMIS, the system itself is very flexible. So these questions and the answer, the response values and stuff, we can customize and set up however we need to. The side effect, and some of you might be aware of it, it's not smart. There is no internal business logic between the questions. One question response value doesn't know and doesn't connect to another value. So what that means is, for example, in the last 12 months, how many times have you touched the health system? They might say no, but then but also say, well, I spent 10 days in hospital. So the values don't kind of connect. There's no integrity checks. That's the unfortunate element, which drives the bulk of our data quality issues. And you guys are all data scientists, you will know this. Data quality is always an issue. Okay, so for the housing supports, we kind of categorized guiding questions into these kind of basic, intermediate, advanced groups. Now, these are only guiding questions. The exciting part really is, well, we want to see if we can find answers to that to get you guys started. But if you come up with other ideas as well, that's would be very much appreciated. But for us, some of the things that we have, so it's what does our data quality look like? Part of the exercise of this Datathon is that we have a lot of data, and there's data. The system was implemented in 2011, so it's like a decade worth of data. But being a charity and having small teams, we haven't had time to really understand all of it. So we know some things anecdotally, but it's like, what is data quality? Like, what percentage of records have errors in the health interaction, the kind of things that I just mentioned, where someone says, no, I have no exposure to the health system, but also identifies that they had 3 emergency room visits. Or the other way around, they say, well, I have health interactions, but no responses in how many days in hospital. On the intermediate side, we're kind of looking into trends in the system interactions over time. This is really kind of one of the key questions. When someone enters the system, a housing program, and gets supports, anecdotally, we suspect that some of the health system utilization will first go up and then eventually go down, because once they're in housing and actually have supports, they can take care of their health a bit more. So there will be more health system interactions, but then hopefully over time it'll taper off. But we actually don't know. We never looked at it. It could be completely the opposite, or it could be any kind of thing. So it's really the kind of how that data behaves we're really interested in. Are there certain programs that see more reduction in system usage than others? So we identify in the data what the program is, what the program type is, and the program-specific identifier. And we want to see, well, do certain programs seem to have better outcomes? And how do the volumes of the interactions change over time? Kind of what I just mentioned. Does it go up and then taper off? Does it continuously go up? Or, is it just up and down, up and down? And is there correlation between reason, leaving, and destination? So some of the key data points that we capture is at exit of someone who's leaving a program, we track the reason for leaving, and we track the destination. These are drop-down options, so they're categorized, they're not free text, which obviously makes them analyzable. And we want to kind of see, well, are there maybe the positive, is there a trend in the behavior of the interactions that might indicate this will lead to a positive outcome or a negative one? And then on the advanced side, we kind of were talking about how can the data best be visualized, like what measures, what chart types, and, how do we want to use it? As you guys know, data is in raw format. It's very complex. Like, how do you best visualize it that makes it intuitive to use? And then, are there any patterns in the interactions, trends, and return rates of individuals? So we have identifiers in the data. So you will be able to see that an individual went into a program, had certain, supports, eventually exited, but they might have come back a year later, or even a month later, or 5 years later. So are there does the data somehow indicate, like if they're returned, so individuals that have returned, the different pattern in their interaction with health system or the justice system. So that's kind of the housing supports data set. The second data set is what we call the client journey data set. And this is really where we have records for every program entry and exit. And so the journey is kind of simplified here. You know, you have at the entry point, you come in on the left, you might be prevention, or you might then go into the system, become homeless, eventually into housing support. But as you can see from the arrows, the journey is not linear. It's not like you come on the wait list, you go housing supports, and then you exit. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes you go into more intensive supports, then graduate out of that to need less supports, but you still need some supports, and then eventually graduate out of that to then go into subsidized housing or something like that. But we know that people come back as well. So we know that people use shelters while they're also in a housing program. So they might be in supportive housing, have a unit, they're there, but they pop up in the data in a shelter sporadically. Or they've just vanished from the housing program, no one knows where they are, but in the data we can see that they're in a shelter. So the journey is really a kind of key interest of us. It's one of the things that we historically were never able to do with the data, because the way before we had the warehouse and build all the infrastructure, the way the data came out of the application was basically unfeasible to do this. But we've managed to kind of get to the point that we have this data set now. We just, again, have not had a chance to really dive into it and see how can we analyze it and what kind of findings, can we see? What are these journeys like? So here's, for example, I just kind of very briefly threw together a little Sankey chart. This is based on some of the data that we will get access. So we have like a program type here, emergency shelters. You can see the bulk of data. But then we kind of see like, okay, prior to this emergency shelter stay, where did the individual come from? These ones here with the 0 basically means they had no prior, so the shelter stay is the first one. There are people who previously were in shelters, so they're continuously in shelters. Others came from a shelter, but then went into a health service program or kind of continued on. So it's really trying to work with this journey. It's complex. We have hundreds of thousands of individuals. I think in the client journey data set, there's about 300 records in there, or 300,000 records, sorry. And it's then kind of trying to see what do we do with this now? Like, can we find clusters? Can we find patterns in those journeys? So how we're kind of looking at the challenges there is on the basic side, it's like, what percentage of journeys have an exit reason of unknown disappeared, which obviously is not a great exit reason. But we don't know at the moment, like how many actually do not return to the system. So how many individuals get supports, then leave and never come back. Like, so we don't have any later on any data points for that. Kind of what clients come back and what percentage of clients come back. Like what's we call it recidivism. So when they had supports, but then later on come back to a shelter or another support program. On the intermediate side, things like compare clients who have used a shelter, but there's those have not used a shelter. Does anything in their journey distinguish them? Like, can we categorize these journeys? And can we say, well, certain patterns of events, like certain journeys, indicate a most likely positive outcomes. Others might indicate a negative outcome. Like, if we can find clusters and category or can find journeys, can we eventually come up with a way of using the data to stop someone going in the wrong direction, if you will. So we could potentially find a certain journey and it gives us a 60-40 chance that someone will have a negative outcome as compared to a positive outcome. Can we find interventions for that to stop that from happening? But also, like, what is the range of the time between program entries? And between graduating or completing programs. So in the data, you will find a number of different day calculations, like how long they've been in the program, between in between the journey. So when they leave one program and enter another program, how many days is in between those two events, from exit of one program to entry into the next one? Same thing, how many from similar thing on the downside. what kind of range of time is between these events? Because you can imagine that yes, someone might get support, leave the program. If they come back within 5 days, that's not great. If they come back 3 years later, that's what we consider an unrelated event. That's not that the program hasn't served its purpose and helped the individual. It might just be another economic crash, and people lost their homes, lost their jobs, and lost their homes, and that's why they come back. So it's trying to get an understanding what kind of ranges we have in there. And then on the advanced sides, it's like, you know, which clients experience, as I mentioned, kind of different kinds of journeys. Do we find clusters in there? Can we categorize those? Can we halfway be going towards a predictive element where we know, well, this kind of pattern of journey that will lead to a positive outcome? We would also kind of want to see, you know, the right to different support programs. It's not just housing. As I said, there's health programs. They're very, very niche programs. So we like to see if any engagement journey like the vary and you know, how do we, as I said, how do we cluster this? Does everyone start with a shelter episode or diversion, which on the graphic, you know, someone would think, well, an individual's journey to homelessness is a shelter or prevention program, but we don't know if that's the case, you know. So it's, you know, so sometimes they will actually show up straight on the wait list and they have never been in a shelter. So it's kind of, again, finding out what do these journeys really look like. We're able to generate the data set, but we have never, ever really had the chance to really dig into that. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the rules around data, because we have quite a few. As you can imagine, this is individual level data, and it's a very disenfranchised, traumatized population. So there's actually 3 acts that govern the data: the FOIP, which is the Freedom of Information Privacy Protection of Privacy Act, the PIPA, Personal Information Protection Act, and the Health Information Act. So all these acts have very, very, very specific guidelines and rules, and determine how we can use and not use identifiable data. Now, while we've stripped a lot of identifiable elements out, the data that's left is still considered identifiable. It's still on a client level. So all these acts still apply. So one of what that means is basically none of the data is allowed to be stored outside of Canada or even leave Canadian borders, even if it would just be transferred across the border but lands back in Toronto or something. So all the data has to be kept on servers or PCs or whatever it is that have to be within the Canadian borders. That's one of the laws. If you were to use this data and use a BI tool that's hosted in the US, that would actually break the rules unless you only integrate aggregated data into it. So none of the data can leave Canadian borders. The data can only be used for the purposes of the Datathon. I believe as part of the registration, you will have signed or will sign an NDA. So the data cannot be used for any purpose that's not specific to this Datathon and the activity that we're talking about here. Individual level data can't be linked with other individual level data. And what that means is that, so individual level is a client level or individual level record with an identifier. Let's say you, for example, would have other data sets, rental information, justice information or something, also on an individual, and you want to join it on that identifier. That's not allowed. That's legally prevented. To do something like that, that's what we do normally with universities, where we go through research approvals and ethics approvals and all of that. So you cannot link it. If you aggregate it, that's a different thing. Yeah. So you could, for example, aggregate your data and say, well, these people are geographically placed here, and now I could link it with aggregated other geographic data. But on an individual level, linking is not allowed. At the end of the Datathon, all the data and all copies of the data must be fully destroyed, because this is a virtual Datathon. That's one of the reasons we limited the data set. But we also, obviously, once you have it, you could make lots of copies of it. So you need to destroy the client level information. So all the data that you get access to. And then aggregated data products. So those are charts, visualizations, tables, any kind of reports, anything that's generated from this. You might generate something that you found like, wow, this is really exciting, and I really would like to show this for the next job I apply or something. You can keep those aggregations, but you need to remove any kind of identifiable labels. So the reason for that is, let's say, for example, we find that a certain program has a lower impact than another program, or that health and justice interactions keep going up, even though they get support. If that kind of is widely distributed, that can easily be misinterpreted. And then if it kind of, let's say the media gets hold of it, that can be very damaging, but it's also very removed because we don't know. This is all very exploratory work. So we don't know what the findings will be. So visualizations can be kept, but any kind of labels that identify this as homelessness data and what the impact of it is, that would have to be removed. So you could still have an access within individuals, just not homeless individuals, and whatever depending on your visualization, whatever the access is. So you just need to anonymize that. And then the last thing, so all the data is actually under the governance of GOA. GOA is funding primarily, and therefore, in a way, owns the data. So for this datathon, we actually had to go through quite a process to make an application to allow us to do this datathon. GOA had to review it and had to approve it. So that's also one of the reasons why we need to kind of be very, very careful with how the data is used, and that we don't lose, that doesn't kind of get utilized in the incorrect ways. And that's it. I'm not sure if I went over time. I probably did. But and I'm not even sure if questions are right now, or if we should wait for questions until the end. I don't know, Jeff, what you think.
Yeah, I think we need to move along right now. Thanks so much, Ollie, for all that amazing information. Just to say that Ollie's presentation deck, as well as the recording of this meetup, will be made available to you. So you can go back and look at some of those detailed charts and graphs and that sort of thing. So, and then folks from the Homeless Foundation, Oliver and others, will be with us on the Saturday all day. So I'm sure there'll be lots of questions on some of the details, and they'll be there to answer those questions on Saturday. So without further ado, Corinne, you can come on and give us a little bit more background on some of the resources we have that will help you understand the data.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks, Ollie. That was a really good overview of everything I've learned from you about the whole process of the last year. So I'm glad you could share that with everybody on the call. Now, what I will do, because Ollie's already explained a lot about the data, I will show you where you can see reviews of this data and get more in-depth information about it. So right now, I'm showing you, at least I hope I'm showing you a G drive, which we'll be making public in the next day. And it currently has a Datathon document, a few detailed diagrams of the data sets that Ollie mentioned, table definitions and pick lists, which are supportive information. And at the bottom, you will see PowerPoints of what Ollie just presented and his recording. So you can listen again if you want to learn more, because every time you go through it, it just becomes easier to understand and to work with, like any new area. So this first document, the CHF Datathon dataset and description, it starts with a brief printed introduction. These are things that Ollie covered. For example, the housing support impact has the intake, quarterly follow-up assessments, and exit assessments. We then give a high-level view of the data. So we show that you got clients and housing programs, and then we have these assessment answers, and this is the bulk of the data, is these assessment answers, which are both your intakes, your quarterly metrics, and your exit responses. It also highlights how the client profile is the identifier. The client ID would be the identifier you use, and you'll see this is significant when we look at the second data set, which is your reconciled client ID. We give several additional pieces of information. We'll tell you where to find the data. We will tell you the recommended client identifier field. We've got a link to the detailed data model, which I'll show you momentarily, a link to the definitions and pick lists, and finally, a link to the data profiling, which I'll show you at the end. Then we repeat the basic analytical questions that Ollie just went over. And this data quality heuristic tip, which touched on what Ollie's mentioned about inconsistencies in the data. This gives you a few tips on how you might want to address inconsistencies when you encounter them.
Sorry,
Now,
Corey, can you make your screen bigger when you're showing this?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I don't actually want people to read the details, but here you go. So here's the tips, and I apologize. Here's the key analytical questions you saw on his slide. And this is the most interesting part, maybe, is a high-level diagram. And then these will be links to help you find more information. Then if I go to one of these detailed maps, I'll start small just so you can see these are all the columns you can work with in the middle. If you look to the left, you'll see that we've binned them. So you can see there's client info, the sequence of programs and assessments. So you can see the order a client went through all the assessments in their history. Also, the order within the programs, because they may be in more than one program. General information about the agency that hosts the program and the program itself. And then the assessment, what kind of assessment, what day the assessment. Finally, program intake, what happens on the move-in, some questions they answer, the quarterlies, and the exit. So this helps you get a quick overview of what columns are relevant to what part of the housing support impact questions. On the right are questions we would really, or not questions, I'm sorry, information we would love you to read because they are important to understanding and working with the data. One being, what identifier is most useful for this data set? We'd say the client ID. We explain what the natural key is. So in this case, it's the client and the program and the assessment type and the entry date and a few other assessment details. So it allows you to get an intuitive sense of what each row of data will contain. We talk a bit about the difference between the client ID and the CHF ID, which is primarily that the client ID, almost every agency will, when a client walks in, create their own ID for that client because they can't see all the data from other agencies. So one person could have a number of client IDs because they will have had different profiles created in the HMIS system. CHF has tried to reconcile these to group them into clients as real people, but it's difficult because they're dealing with limited information. So client ID created by CHF is a very reasonable estimate of who the individual people are, but keep in mind that they may have overmatched or undermatched in some cases because they just didn't have enough information, no fingerprints, for example, to really tell people apart. Important note on the data is that wherever there were nulls, like blanks in the data where just nothing was entered, we have made the decision to enter a value. So dates will be January 1st, 1900. Numbers will be minus 99999, and characters will be no value. So keep this in mind. If the data looks funky with dates or numbers, did you have nulls in there? And otherwise, just remember to think about what you're going to do with these values where no data had been entered, because we're forcing you to think about that. You will notice the date is 1900, so make sure that you're dealing with 4-digit dates for the year, like 1900 versus 2000. And we've made this easier by taking each date in our data, like the move-in date, and we have actually put in 3 versions. One is the standard Oracle format, but then we've added 2 other formats so you can pick which you would prefer to work with. And you'll notice they both have the 4-digit year. So going back to, that's housing assessment. And I will just show you that we have the same information for client journey. We have information about the different kinds of programs, which will be helpful for you to read. And then we have this data model, very simple data model to show that, again, the data is by the program and by the client, and then by their entry date. And here you work with the CHF's client ID, because a number of programs didn't go into HMIS, so they don't even have an HMIS client ID. So this is what we recommend you work with. And if we go to the detailed data, I will just show you a few things, because much of it, same idea as you had before on the nulls and the dates. But you'll notice that here we've got our client information, our agency and program information, which is generic, the information about the client entering the program, which is the date, and the order. So this is really nice that CHF has provided the order of all these different events over the lifetime as a client, and the age at entry, current status, and then when they leave the program, you'll see we've got the reason leaving, the destination, and in both tables we have sentiment types. These are awesome because they let you group all the reasons of leaving and all the destinations into a positive reason, they found permanent housing, or a neutral, or a negative reason, such as they just disappeared. So these will be useful in your analysis. Finally, for client shelters episodes, you'll see that we captured night stays and day stays and total stays. Now, the interesting part is that CHF has done a lot of data derivation. So they've derived day data, like the days in the program. Also, this is harder to calculate, is the days between the previous program's entry and exit to this program. And again, from this program to the next program. Also, just yes, no flags for, was the previous program more than 90 days before this program, and the subsequent program more than 90 days after, which comes to the causal. Is it a unrelated or related that they now have entered another program? We have the same thing for month, and then for the derived program type and a number of other flags. So program type we have for the current program, but they provided it for the 3 programs prior and the 3 programs subsequent. So when you're doing analysis, remember that these have been calculated. So if you can think of a good use for them, definitely take advantage of it. It's terrific they provided it. The grain, as I mentioned, is just the client, the program, and the entry date. And emergency shelters, we don't count every stay in a program, but an episode is a series of stays where no gap was more than 30 days apart. So that is most of the data. I am going to show you that we do have the detailed definitions. For the 5 or 10 minutes it would take you to read these, I think they will help you better understand and use the data. And the last thing I want to show is our data profiling. Now, this is only for people who have completed the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement, but we start to get into seeing the actual data. So Paula created this from our 2 tables and a few views that she created in Oracle. You'll see the index here of all the things she has created. And that guide doesn't want to blow up, so you'll have to look at those online. And then once you're in here, you can see that there are a number of tables. And when I'm not in presentation mode, I can actually have better navigation. So check out her PDF, and you'll see that if you wanted to see the client journey only, what kind of programs they were in, you can see that on this chart. And I will just let you guys look at that in detail at your leisure. So the other thing I will mention, the last thing I will mention, is that the data is going to be accessible in two forms. The one is going to be in the database, and we'll have two tables and two views that you can see in the database. The navigation errors. The other thing you will see is we've provided two CSV files for you, so you don't need to touch Oracle at all. You can just touch the CSVs. And the last thing we have done is that Paula has volunteered to do a demo on November 6th in Remo. So she'll be at a table with people who would like to learn how to import data into Power BI. She will show you how to do that with the data sets, if that would help you get off to a quick start. And with that, I will hand things over to people who will show you how to get to the database so you can get access to these data sets.
Thank you, Corinne. And there's, as you can see, I mean, a lot of data here, you know, fair bit of complexity and that sort of thing. So we would really encourage you to sign off on the NDAs and get that back to us. We will make the data available to you in advance of November 6th, right, with the executed NDAs. So having that data in advance, getting used to it, exploring it in advance of the Saturday will really be helpful. So would encourage you all to you know, sign up with the forms that we've provided, execute the NDA, and we'll also talk about team formation a little bit later. But Naoko, can you come on and describe the instructions document? We'll answer a lot of questions for people as well.
Yeah, hold on. I'm going to share this one. So can you see the screen that says Calgary Data for Good Datathon?
Yeah, if you can make it a little bit bigger, that would be great.
Yep.
Not too big. There you go.
Okay, so is this a good size? Yeah, okay, so this is the instruction document. I put the link to this document in the chat, so hopefully you can see that. So the first is a note about the requirement that the data needs to stay in Canada and be deleted after Datathon. I think Oli has gone over this already, so I'll skip this part. There's a link to the Datathon objectives document here. And then in case you haven't registered yet, so there is the registration process, which is sign up via Eventbrite, and then you receive email asking you a link to the form to submit and sign. You get the non-disclosure agreement that you need to sign. And after we review the agreement, we'll send you additional login, which will get you access to data. So, so once we review your NDA, we'll send you a login to our database, which is going to be the most flexible way you get the data. So after me, Fekrat's going to walk through the details of how to use the SQL developer tool to access the data. There's also a way to access the data using Python. There's some instructions here. You might need some additional installation of Oracle Instant Client. You may not depending on your OS. So, and here's the configuration you can use in case you're accessing using Python. Also, a third way of accessing the data is to go to the Data for Good Datathon Cloud environment. And again, we'll be giving you credential for this after we review your NDA. So this link will take you to, this is the Eventbrite, this page, and you will have the login to use, and then you'll be able to download the CSV, so the data in the CSV format. And so that's getting the data. And additional information we have in this Datathon Cloud environment is, so this is the CSV and description of the data, which Corinne has shared. So there's also a link to the public version of that document here as well. So it's the same. And also diagrams. I think Corinne has kindly put those in a G Drive, so you can actually access those tomorrow after the folder is made available. Also, once you have worked on your project, we'd like you to upload your work again in the cloud environment here. And during and also like leading up to the Datathon, we also set up a Slack environment where you can communicate with other participants, and somebody will also be monitoring the Slack channel. So like if you have questions, you can communicate there. And then we'll also be setting up Remo for the day of the Datathon. I think David is going to go over this a little bit more, and there's team formation that we encourage you to do. In case you want to work in teams. And again, we also have a very short recommendation about sharing your work, so that to put some time into writing up a description of your work when you submit your work, so that people from the Calgary Homeless Foundation can really follow what you did and understand your insights. So to get the full value out of your work, please put some time into writing the document. And again, it's the same link to the cloud environment where you are expected to put your result in. So I think I will now pass it on to Fekrat, who's going to go over the details of accessing the data using SQL Developer.
Sure. Thank you, Naoko. Just 1 second. I will quickly share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, again, if you can make it a bit bigger.
Sure, thank you. That's good. So just to correct, so the accessing the data in Oracle doesn't necessarily have to be through SQL Developer. That is one of the ways you can connect. That is actually more of a visual tool for you to navigate the tables in their table format and look at the data in a tabular way. And if you want to use basic SQLs and even complex ones, you are more than welcome to use the power of that server to your advantage to generate whatever you need. So SQL Developer is just a tool. It's not the only tool. So you have many tools to connect, whether through Python, R, or Power BI. You can use any tool that you have to directly look at the data. And the main advantage, I would say, and this is, we always look at it from also, as Ollie has mentioned before, this will make it easy for you not to worry about destroying the data later, because you are directly reading the data. And when you're done with connecting to the database, you do not need to worry about cleanup of your machine. So that's why we have this as our #1 option, for not only the reason it does require you to be able to connect, but it will also keep you in line with the data restrictions that you have signed the NDA to follow. And basically speaking, as Naoko has mentioned, the NDA that you have signed, once we approve that and we ensure that you have properly submitted that NDA, you will be getting another follow-up email that will have your username and password to the database. And of course, we have highlighted in this document the step-by-step instructions of downloading the SQL developer, but that is not the way you need, that's not the only way. So it's just going to Oracle website, just registering for a free account, download the application as in any free application that is available on the internet. And by clicking that download, I just had a screenshot of your creating the account and logging in. And once you have that, we have put you an example of how you fill up the data, the connectivity details, and this will be shared with you earlier once you are approved for this datathon. And this will allow you directly to drag and drop the tables that are there for you, where you have given you access, or you can simply, one second. Or you can simply type in the select statement where you can read from those tables directly. So that's the visual tool for you that is available from Oracle for free with this Oracle database. And of course, as Corinne also mentioned, in the database, you will have the two main CSVs with some analytics. And as Paula has presented some distributions and some data analysis that she's done into views. So those will be helpful to you if you would like to see them. And they are available in the views. And I actually missed if they are actually going to be available in the files or not, but I don't think so at this point in time. So that's the connections for the database. We will be in, as I'll just reiterate the last part, we will be in a data operations table in Remo for your help, to help you with connecting if you face any difficulty connecting to the Oracle database. It should be pretty straightforward. And we will be able to, will be available during the Datathon for help. Back to you, Jeff. You can continue.
Yeah, thanks so much. I know there's lots of material here, and then as you start to go through it, if you do have questions, a great way to contact us is through that Slack channel that is in the instructions document. So, you know, so now we'll, last speaker here, David, will tell us about the team formation and the bit on the Remo environment.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to be pretty quick here. So I'll just have a few additional things to mention. And one of them is that, you know, as part of the Datathon, and I think one of the beauties of the Datathon is that you have the option to work as a team. And so what we will do, if you do want to work as a team, ideally ahead of time, we will place you in a team so you can get organized with your teammates before the Datathon and start thinking about how you would like to analyze data and work with your teammates to get organized, essentially. In order to place you in teams, you need to fill out that same form that Naoko was just referring to, where you also submit your NDA. And so in there, we will ask some questions about what tools you like to work in, how experienced you are with the different tools. And then based on that, we'll try to match you up. So for example, if 5 individuals like to work with Power BI and don't like to work in R or Python, then we'll try to put those 5 individuals together so that you're familiar with the tools that you each work in, and you can help each other out, essentially. And we also try to take a look at things like how much experience do you have, so that we can, you know, put more experienced folks together with other folks that are maybe just getting started. So we have a bit of a balance there. It's optional to join a team, but I really highly encourage it. I always find it a really good opportunity to meet other professionals and individuals that work in the industry and are interested in similar subject matters as myself. The other piece there then is, yes, if you already have a team, that form will also allow you to identify your team members. So if you don't want to be placed in a team by us, you can specify, hey, I want to work with, you know, the teammates that you've self-organized with, and then we can definitely accommodate that as well. And we will, yeah, the sooner you submit that form, the earlier we can place you in teams, and the earlier you can get started and start to get organized. So definitely, we haven't received a ton of NDAs yet, so please make sure, everybody, that you submit those forms so we can get those NDAs, understand if you want to join a team or not, and you can hit the ground running the day of the Datathon, because as we all know, the time is just going to fly by that day. on the day of the Datathon, we are going to be using a platform called Remo that we alluded to a couple of times here. And Remo, if you haven't used it before, it's like a virtual conferencing network platform. And so you walk in and basically what you see is tables laid out as you would in a conference room, or sorry, in a conference floor. And so one of the beauties there is that you can go in and we will have tables pre-labeled with your group number. And so you can join that table there, meet your teammates there. And then during the Datathon, during the day as well, get up basically and go visit with other teams. Or as Fekrat alluded to earlier, if you have questions, you can go to the data ops table. I believe Corinne mentioned earlier that Paula will be at a table providing instructions on accessing the data through Power BI. So you can pop over there as well. And of course, Ollie and the CHF team, as well as the RBC team will be around. So you can go and communicate and chat with those folks as well. So hopefully it'll be able to lend a bit of a natural feel to it, given that we're still all virtual and we're not just going to be in one big Zoom conference room, but you'll have the ability to move around a bit and network and chat with other folks the way you would if you were physically at the University of Calgary or so. And just real quick, sorry, I saw there's a question, so I'm getting distracted. Just real quick, once more. So we're going to have a remote conference set up at the beginning of the day. We're going to break that down over lunch and take a few hours break, and then we'll reconvene at the end of the day with another Remo session when we're getting together for presentations. And yeah, I think that's actually all that I had to present. So Jeff, back to you, and looks like we have a question, so we can answer questions now as well, I believe.
Yeah.
So the question is, who should the NDA be emailed to? Fekrat, do you want to answer that?
Sure, I will answer that actually. So the email that you receive should have had the instruction to the website that the link is there. If you click on it, it will open the website and you can click on the Datathon NDA submission, and you have to submit that through the form. So you don't need to email that to us back. You just need to do that.
And I'll add there, so it's important as well that you register through Eventbrite. So make sure you do that as well. But the link to the form is actually, I just put it in the chat there. It's available in the documentation as well that Noko shared. So if you happen to miss that email and you are registered on Eventbrite for the Datathon, you can access that form directly through which you upload the NDA.
Correct.
All right, I'm cognizant of time, and we're getting thin on it right now. But if there are any kind of big high-level questions that anybody might have, we can answer those. And then smaller questions or more specific ones, I'd encourage you to use the Slack environment and going forward, and of course on November 6th as well. So there is something in the chat. So we will get the data as soon as the NDA is verified and can only work with it on. No, you can work. You will only get the data once you execute the NDA. Once you've done that, let's say you do it tomorrow, we will provide the data to you, and you can get familiar with that data in advance of November 6th. So that's the advantage of getting it early, because you can start to play around with it, start to use it, maybe even start your analysis in advance of November 6th.
Yeah, and Jeff, we did have a question. Are we allowed to use the cloud computing to test the data? No, you will not. You should use your local, any software that you would like to use. It has to be on your desktop, because when you say cloud computing, you cannot be deterministic about the location where that data is going to reside. So at this point in time, you can use your local desktop tools, whether it is Jupyter or Power BI. You have to use the local version of that software just to avoid any conflicts with the NDA that you are signing.
Right, and that is extremely important. Recall Oliver's statement. You're in fact breaking the law if that data goes outside of Canada. So please, let's have none of that happen and keep everything within the Canadian boundaries. So.
I don't see any other questions so far.
Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up here. Thanks thanks to the Data for Good core team. A lot of work has gone in to the background. Thanks so much to Oliver and all the Calgary Homeless Foundation. Thanks again to RBC for sponsoring. And you know, to get your lunch, you do have to show up on the 6th. So I encourage you to show up on Remo, and you'll get your ticket for DoorDash, which will be great. And we will gather at 9 o'clock on November the 6th and have a few introductory comments, allow you to kind of work away. We might gather once kind of around noon. Then we will put out a question as to whether your team or you as an individual want to do a presentation at the end. So that we'll get those responses, and then around 3 o'clock, we'll have a whole series of presentations, which are going to be really exciting and fascinating. And then after the end of the day, we're done, all the data gets destroyed, and we're thinking that our meetup in November, the 4th Thursday in November, we'll have a bit of a debrief of some of the great stuff that happened at that point. So I see there's some messages. Anything that we need to cover? Okay, looks like some thank you. So thank you to all of you for your interest. And we really look forward to engaging with you virtually and working on the data. So take care, good night, and have fun over the next week or so, and we'll see you on Saturday morning for sure. Okay, bye now.
Thank you.